Welcome back, Sebastian here. So time for my power rankings for the 2025 Monaco Grand Prix. As always, Monaco is a race where qualifying definitely is pretty much, 80-90% of the race. So for some drivers who, didn't do a whole lot on Sunday, had a pretty uneventful race, I think qualifying is obviously going to play a much bigger role in that than I think it usually would. But there are a couple, exceptions here and there. So I really felt when I was making these power rankings that there was a really big drop-off between basically number 14 and basically the drivers below. So the bottom six, and then basically you had like another group going upwards from there. So starting with number 20, I'm going to go with Lance Stroll. So for Stroll, qualified 19th, out-qualified by his teammate Alonso by 8.9 tenths of a second. Not good enough. Last time out in Imola, qualifying wasn't too bad. Alonso qualified 5th, Stroll qualified 8th, but here, again, Alonso qualified very well, about midway into the top 10, and Stroll was out in Q1. So yeah, simply not good enough around Monaco. In the race, he recovered to 15th. I believe he had one of the more conventional strategies, didn't pit super early, pit super late, but yeah, just kind of brought it home to a 15th place. That plus some of the other incidents in the weekend in free practice, which gave him, 2 different grid penalties, were also not great either. I think one of them was for hitting the back of Leclerc, or one was for, basically moving onto the racing line when Leclerc was trying to pass him, and then the other was for impeding Gasly, I believe, in qualifying. So number 19 is Gabriel Bortoleto, qualified 16th, out-qualified by his teammate Hulkenberg by 0.03 of a second. To be honest, I thought the qualifying was fine. If that was it, then he probably would have been, 5 places or so higher on this list. But unfortunately for Bortoleto, a bit of a overambitious move, I would say, at Porsche. Probably should have just not necessarily gave Antonelli more race, but he probably should have backed out of that move, kind of basically going around the outside of Porsche is generally not a great idea. And again, when you're in a Sauber fighting a Mercedes, realistically, that's a move that's not going to work super well. Obviously, because it's Monaco, you can definitely keep faster cars behind, so it's not like, Silverstone or something. But that being said, I think it definitely cost him quite a bit of time in his race, and without that, could have finished quite a bit higher, but he ends up finishing 14th, even despite that off on the first lap. Number 18 is Pierre Gasly. Now, for Gasly, qualifying was, good in the sense that he out-qualified his teammate, bad in the sense that he was still knocked out in Q1. It seems like this year's Alpine, very unlike 2 years ago where they were on the podium, 3rd, 4th fastest car at this track, they were really, really struggling with the bumps, the curbs, despite the fact that, again, given that their known lack of engine power, this is a track that, people thought, maybe this is a track where they could do really well. But it seems like they really only quick this year and, really smooth tracks with, very few aggressive curbs. But yeah, in the race, so out-qualified his teammate Colapinto by 0.6 of a second. Not sure if that was more representative of Colapinto or him, but nonetheless, got knocked out in Q1. And then in the race, a bit of a silly mistake. He basically tried to follow the racing line, following Tsunoda, who was ahead. Tsunoda, I think, knowing that this is he was never fully alongside at any point, and Tsunoda basically just moved back to the racing line to, give himself more space to take as much speed into the apex of the corner as he could, and I think it basically just caught Gasly out a bit. I think the initial thought was that it was brake failure, but based on his interviews and his body language afterwards, it seems like it was just kind of a really silly mistake from him. I don't think he would have done much in the race, otherwise he was on the same strategy as Behrman, for example. But again, Behrman did move up, but not a huge amount. So for Gasly, probably doesn't affect his, the end result too much. He probably wasn't scoring points anyway, but definitely a bit of a clumsy mistake from him. Number 17 is Franco Colapinto. So qualified 18th, well off the pace of his teammate Gasly all weekend, not just in qualifying, all through the practice sessions as well. I think really lacking for confidence around this track. In the end, qualifies 18th, I should say. Or no, actually qualified, because I think Stroll qualified 18th. Yeah, this is starting position, not qualifying position. So he must have qualified like 20th or 19th. Yeah, my bad. But anyway, I know we got out qualified by about 6/10, which is definitely a bit more time than you would like. And then in the race, I think a bit of a beneficial strategy, comes home to finish in 13th place. Number 16 is Kimi Antonelli. So for Antonelli, crashed in qualifying. Again, this is a track where, again, like I said before, 90% of your race result is in qualifying. So crashing in Q2 was really just not necessary. You shouldn't be having to push at 100% to get out of Q2. Obviously, final lap of Q3, it's okay to take that kind of level of risk. It was a pretty innocuous mistake. He basically just turned into the corner of the Nouvelle chicane a little bit too early, clipped the barrier, and then basically it broke his suspension and he went into the wall on the other side of the chicane. In the race, of course, finished 18th, not a whole lot he could have done. Mercedes were kind of in no man's land when it came to strategy. They were just kind of sitting around waiting for some free air that never came. And Russell obviously took matters into his own hands, and we'll talk to that when we get to him. But for Antonelli, couldn't really do a whole lot with what he was given. Kind of sacrificed himself a little bit to give Russell space to basically make a pit stop. And for him, he didn't really have time to get the favor received from him, from Russell. So again, was kind of just forced to pit on his own and finished the race in 18th. So not a great race for Antonelli. He's going to want to start trying to put more clean weekends together. Number 15 is Yuki Tsunoda. So for Tsunoda, qualifies 12th, out-qualified by his teammate Verstappen by 5.4 tenths. Besides that, it was a pretty quiet race. Didn't really make any big mistakes, I thought. Had a really hard time with the fact that it was Monaco and you can't overtake here. In the past, front-running cars could actually, overtake and move up through the order. We saw Verstappen do that quite a few times back in his younger days. But unfortunately, this is a very different Monaco in the sense that the gaps between cars are much smaller. I think these cars, at least, they're much more developed aerodynamically, so it's much harder for them to overtake each other than 5, 6, 7 years ago. But for Tsunoda, again, a bit of a deficit in qualifying, and that's something he's going to really want to rectify in the coming races, especially at tracks where overtaking is so difficult. And he's really going to start executing on race weekend and start scoring good hauls of points, not just a 10th, a 9th, a bunch of 11th places sporadically. All right, number 14 is Oliver Behrman. So for Behrman, qualified 20th, out-qualified by his teammate Ocon by 1.4 tenths of a second. Deficit to Ocon, not so bad. I'm not sure exactly what was going on with the Haas in qualifying, because the amount of, the progression that it made in terms of just lap time from Q1 to Q2 to Q3 was, pretty remarkable. So normally when you have, teammate, one's in Q3, one's out in Q1, a bit like with Stroll and Alonso, you'd expect a pretty big qualifying deficit, but with Behrman and Ocon, it was actually pretty small. In the race, finished 12th, a bit of an aggressive strategy, didn't help too much, but, it definitely helped him improve on that starting position. Quiet race otherwise, but I thought, not a terrible weekend all in all for Behrman. Of course, you had that 10-place grid penalty for the practice red flag incident. Again, a bit of a silly mistake for Behrman. I think obviously the stewards understood his rationale, but they generally tend to be quite, strict about these kinds of things where, it doesn't really matter what you think. If you break the rules in a certain way, then, you're going to get penalized for that. All right, number 13 is Carlos Sainz. So for Sainz, qualified 11th, out-qualified by his teammate by 6 tenths of a second. In the race, finished 10th, got himself a nice solitary point. So for Sainz, I really felt like the Williams had a lot more pace here. I felt they probably could have been competitive or even a little bit quicker than the Racing Bulls. And so the fact that you had the Williams, behind both Racing Bulls, I think for me, really, I think suggests that I think both drivers did underperform a little bit in qualifying, as that really dictated how their races went. And yeah, for Sainz especially, got himself knocked down Q2, probably at the pace for Q3, but again, just not able to extract the absolute lap time when he needed to. All right, number 12 is Nico Hülkenberg. So Hülkenberg qualified 13th. Out-qualified his teammate Bortoleto by 300ths of a second. I thought, realistically, Q2 was probably the most he could have done in the Sauber. In the race, finishes 16th. Pretty quiet weekend all around. Not particularly great, but also, not terrible either. So I think, 12th place is about a pretty reasonable spot for him. All right, now number 11 is the other Williams driver of Alex Albon. I kind of already mentioned this when I talked about Sainz, but I felt that, both Williams kind of underperformed a bit in qualifying, and that was definitely true for Albon. Qualified 10th, like I said, out-qualified Sainz by 6.8 tenths. I felt that Albon, if you look at his qualifying times, his Q2 time was actually much quicker than his Q3 one, which really suggested that he just had a couple of really scruffy laps in Q3, didn't have a clean lap, and that was the reason why he started so far down compared to where he was placing in Q1, Q2. So again, that really is the majority of that lap time of that, I should say, that position on my power rankings. In terms of the race, finished 9th. I thought decent race. Williams did a really good job with the team play, making sure that neither driver got kind of hung out to dry, but benefiting both of them at the same time. I think if neither Racing Bulls nor Williams had done that team play, I think some of the drivers who stopped really early, such as Behrman, might have actually been able to score points. But just because of how they were doing that, it basically made that they were just roadblocks blocked by cars ahead. So yeah, unfortunately, weren't able to make use of that strategy. All right, number 10, probably his best weekend of the season so far is Liam Lawson. Qualifies 9th, still out-qualified by his teammate by about 0.2 of a second. That's something that he's going to want to fix. Otherwise, there could be, I think, his seat could definitely be at risk at the end of the season. Qualifying, I think, has just not been good enough, overall for Lawson. In the race, I think decent job, good job with the strategy, helping his teammate Hajar consolidate his, really high points paying finish. But, I think for Lawson, obviously, he would be wishing it was the other way around. It was Hajar who was putting the work in to consolidate his really great finish. But yeah, comes home to 9th place, solid weekend overall, and I think definitely his best weekend of the season. Hopefully he can, take this and use it as positive momentum going forward, and help him, in the coming races to, maybe out-qualify Hajar a bit more frequently, finish ahead of him a bit more frequently in the races. All right, number 9 is Lewis Hamilton. So for Hamilton, qualified 5th, I should say, yes. Qualified 4th. I should say, started 7th because of the grid penalty for impeding Verstappen. Out-qualified by his teammate Leclerc by about 0.3, so definitely a bit of a gap there. But nonetheless, I think, definitely a decent result in qualifying by his, I would say post-World Championship standards. I would say the standards the last couple of years. In the race, I think good strategy on the first pit stop, undercut a couple of cars and got back, most of that position that he lost, most of the positions that he lost from his grid penalty. So came home to 5th place, and then after that was basically just kind of in no man's land for the rest of the race. Number 8, I'm going to put George Russell. Russell's a really hard one to grade. Obviously, he qualified 14th, out-qualified his teammate Antonelli by about 3.8 tenths. But unfortunately for Russell, his car failed him in qualifying, forced him to start, well down the order. And that's obviously something that's not his fault. But unfortunately, because it's Monaco, you can't really overtake, you can't make up positions that easily. And for Russell, he got basically blockaded by the two Williams drivers. So yeah, really, really frustrating for him. Obviously, his one big move of the race, his one big strategy move was that he intentionally took a drive-through penalty for cutting the chicane and gaining an advantage, basically overtaking Albon off track. I think in the end, the penalty actually was a net benefit. So I do, again, kudos to Russell for, taking the risk of doing that and realizing that this was actually a more beneficial strategy. To be honest, I think anything short of a stop and go or a black flag was a net advantage in that situation. So again, good on Russell for making use of it. Probably should have tried doing it a little bit earlier in the race, as that might have actually he might have maybe been able to score points if he had just done that in the first place. But again, I think if that had been the case, I think it would have been a much more controversial result nonetheless. So for Russell, finishes 11th in the Grand Prix. Again, really tricky to assess because of the fact that his car, basically gave up in qualifying. But I think, overall still, a positive weekend for him. I can't really say against anything about his performance in particular. All right, number 7 is Oscar Piastri, qualified third, out-qualified by his teammate by about 1.8 tenths of a second, so a bit of a gap there in qualifying. In the race, again, just came home to third place. Not a really whole lot to say about Piastri's Grand Prix. I think overall, he was close in pace to Norris throughout the weekend, but I did feel like Norris had a little bit more pace than him and was a little bit more comfortable with the car in qualifying. So if that is, something that can, continue in the coming races, I think Piastri should be a bit concerned about, Norris's one lap pace, because that's been something that's been an issue for him in the first 7 races of the season. And again, I think his race pace is a little bit better than Piastri still. So if he can start qualifying ahead of Piastri, it'll be that much more difficult for Piastri to finish ahead of him and maintain this championship lead that he has. All right, number 6 is Esteban Ocon. I think great qualifying session by the Frenchman. Qualifies 8th, out-qualifies his teammate by about a tenth and a bit, but still, nonetheless, I think was one of the best drivers for the best of the rest in qualifying. I think a bit of an unexpected result in the Haas, given that they've been. But again, at the same time, they've been so inconsistent in qualifying. Sometimes off the pace for Q3, sometimes they're both knocked out in Q1, and it's something that I think they really need to get on top of, because I think it shows that there's quite a bit of inconsistency from both drivers in in that kind of situation. In the race, really solid result. Picked up a spot with Alonso's DNF, so finished in 7th place, and yeah, really good job by Ocon to pick up solid points for Haas. Number 5 is Fernando Alonso. So, of course, for Alonso, qualified in 6th. Great qualifying result from him again. I think Aston Martin have started to finally unlock a little bit of pace in this year's car, or it's the case that they do really, really well with the really soft compounds of tires. And if we go back to, harder compounds like a C3, C4, perhaps they won't have the pace in qualifying to be able to, have these good results. So it'll be interesting to see if this is genuine improvement from Aston Martin, or if this is just a tire compound specific, improvement. In the race, had a really solid race, made his first pit stop, and then unfortunately, car gave up on him. Of course, not his fault, so he doesn't get affected by that. But still, really unfortunate result I felt for Alonso. All right, number 4 is Max Verstappen. So for Verstappen, qualified in 5th initially, was about like 6 or 7 tenths off pole, which is one of the biggest gaps he's had all season so far. So yeah, just really didn't have the pace in qualifying. Out-qualified Tsunoda by about 5.4 tenths. And then in the race, tried to really, bold strategy to try to, do something. Stayed out very, very late. But of course, with the mandatory 2-stop rule, he was always going to have to, pit. Eventually, he couldn't have just taken the checkered flag. Likely would have gotten like a pretty harsh penalty for that. So yeah, for Verstappen, I think decent result. I think he even admitted himself there was a little bit more pace in the car in qualifying. So that's kind of what's keeping him out of the top 3. I think this was always a track where it was going to be a case of damage limitation. And the worst case scenario, I think, was a bit of a situation like Mercedes where, neither drivers were in the points. So I think given how many slow corners there are, given that this is Red Bull's main weakness this year, I think, Verstappen will be pretty content with a P4 finish. All right, number 3 is Isaac Hadjar, great qualifying result, qualified in 6th, again moved up to 5th with Hamilton's penalty. Out-qualified Lawson by about 2/10, and then in the race, again, really strong team play, really big, credit to Lawson for basically being such a good blockade, but that really, helped Hadjar quite a bit. Obviously, it unintentionally helped a bunch of other cars as well, but at the same time, I think Hadjar did an excellent race, and for a first time at Monaco, this is probably one of the first debut races at Monaco rookies had in quite a few years. Like, I would say probably the last decade or so. It's arguably one of the strongest rookie races at Monaco, I would say. Now, moving into the top two, pretty obviously who these two drivers are, Leclerc and Norris. I think it's a bit of a tough one. I think very, very close these two drivers were. And I think you can make a pretty strong argument for either driver being at number 1. But for me, I'm going to go with Lando Norris number 2 and Charles Leclerc number 1. So for Norris, qualified on pole and then took the race win. Out-qualified his teammate by about 1.8 tenths of a second. For Leclerc, qualified P2, obviously. Out-qualified his teammate Hamilton by about 0.3, and qualified, finished the race in P2. So, in terms of, rationale behind putting Leclerc over Norris, I think ultimately, the McLaren, while Ferrari was, quite a bit improved from where they've been most of the rest of this season, I do think that still ultimately, McLaren did have the faster car on one lap pace, and that was, pretty decisive in allowing, Norris to, get himself pole. That being said, I think, Norris obviously did a great job of putting the lap in and getting that lap in finally and qualifying, something I've been struggling with. But at the same time, I do think that I think it's for, Leclerc, I think he did a great job as well in that Ferrari. And I do think, he extracted a little bit more closer to 100% of the car's performance. And, obviously the Ferrari's outperforming the car is one that's, physically, impossible. But at the same time, I think, it's something that you could use to describe, I think, Leclerc's result in qualifying, splitting the two Ferraris, despite the fact that he was still pretty frustrated with that. I think just shows, I think, how much, self-belief and how much self-confidence there is. Nonetheless, I think very, very close between those two drivers, 1 and 2. You can make a pretty solid argument either way. So there you go. That is my power rankings for the 2025 Monaco Grand Prix.